Hi, I'm Tracy,
And I'm Rachel, and together we are,
the Nobodies.
yep, just a couple of gals you've never heard of sharing what they had know so far.
And hopefully, the little bit we know ends up helping you a lot.
Yeah, hopefully. Thanks for joining us today. We are talking about, honestly, one of my favorite subjects in the wintertime, and that is soup. And here's what we know so far. So let's get right into it, Tracy.
Okay, but before we do, I have to tell you something.
Okay.
I don't mean to brag, but I discovered what my superpower is.
You have a superpower. Tell
I
me.
have a superpower. We all have a superpower. We just have to dig deep and find it.
Okay.
I'm telling you, my superpower is the ability to pour anything into anything without a funnel, without spilling.
Really?
Seriously,
Good
I can
job.
just take a glass of water and pour it into like a really small opening. Is
And
that a
just,
superpower?
I think it might be, especially
I,
if you don't have any paper towels or sponges to wipe it up with. So.
I also would like to input on whether there's some way I can turn that into a money making venture,
All right,
please.
we'll let you know. Anybody out there,
Okay,
if you know, let us know.
thank you. Thank
Put your comments down below, as they say.
you.
Okay, soup. Let's get into it. Tell me, what do we love
Let's talk
about
about
soup? Oh my goodness.
um so I think we're both kind of on the same page a little bit
Yeah.
in that we're really into vegetarian soups right now,
Yes.
right?
Well, and I think it's just honestly, it's the best way to save money using up stuff you already have on hand. And it's kind of like where the week's leftovers kind of go. I think it's just a great way to like clean up the fridge, essentially, like the veggie
It really
crispers. Yeah. Because anything that's already kind of like not quite good enough to do fresh or sauteed, honestly, you can throw it in a soup and no one would ever know the difference. And at the
it's
very
absolutely
least, you can make a killer broth and funnel out all of the ugly stuff and just move on that way. So that's my personal favorite way to use just clean out the fridge, the pantry, get it all going. And usually it saves you a trip like out of the house to have to go get something because you almost always have something on hand.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, you can eat it for,
Forever.
lots of times, maybe
Forever.
take over from
Are you
cooking.
making your own broth these days?
I am making my own broth today with these days in the Instant Pot, of course.
Okay.
Loving how easy it is to make broth in the Instant Pot.
Absolutely. What are you doing?
So
How are you
I
making
am
this?
just saving up basically my carrot, celery, and onion scraps mostly. Not that I don't throw some other things in there too, but that's the majority of it.
And that's kind of the base for like almost all broths, right?
I think so. Um it's kind of funny. I call it the cycle of flavor. That's my new word for it.
Okay.
So of course it's got a million names: Mirepoix, the Holy Trinity, with Southern cooking,
Mm-hmm.
sofrito with Latin cooking. There's a reason why that combination is so popular.
Sure.
It's because it creates great flavor.
Yeah.
And so I like to use them as both as the foundation for my flavors in my soups
Mm-hmm.
and also for making my broth. And then for me, it just feels like it kind of doubles up on the and enhances the flavor of everything. So it's like chop them up, save your scraps,
Mm-hmm.
make your soup, make your
Right.
broth. It's like this wonderful cycle that you just keep
Right.
going with.
And I wonder if there's must be a correlation because you're right, it is kind of the basis for all broths for all cultures just across the board. And I wonder if there's a correlation that these also happen to be typically the less expensive vegetables. So they're just probably easier to come by, probably once upon a time easier to grow, probably almost able to get it year round. So that kind of
I
makes
bet
sense.
I bet you're right. And you know what? Poor man's food in every culture is usually the best
It's
food,
the
isn't
best
it?
stuff. Yeah, poor man's food is the comfort food.
That's right.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. So then what I like to do after making enough soup, and whether it's just, what you're calling it, your mire, say that word for me again, mirepoix?
Mirepoix.
Mirepoix. I'm assuming that's French. Um, so when you're making your base, you can either take that and use it right then, or you can put it into some sort of freezer safe container and put it in the freezer, use it in the future, or you can start adding whatever it is you want to add to the base. And then, my favorite thing is then making enough that you can eat it throughout the week, or freeze it and then come back to it. It's an easy thing to defrost.
Absolutely.
And then kind of just keep decorating it as you go along. So cheap,
Exactly.
convenient, freeze as well, just can't. So what's your like favorite recipe to add to this? Like, what are some of the things that you're just go to every time? So you got your carrots, your celery, your onions. Then what?
I usually start with that. I love mushrooms. Love putting kale in there. Peppers. What else? What do you like? What else do you like?
I've noticed I made the other day, I had a bunch of potatoes. They were red potatoes.
Yeah.
And it was a great way to make a creamy broth without adding any dairy. So I added the potatoes in the Instapot again, let those cook up, and then put my immersion blender. If you don't have that, you can put it into a regular blender and do it little batches at a time. But you just mash it up. Essentially, it's kind of almost like mashed potato soup is basically what it becomes.
Yeah.
But then just keep adding enough liquids to keep it creamy enough. And again, no dairy, no butter, no extra fats, no oils. It just on its own just became its own sort of flavorful thing. You could do the same thing probably with sweet potatoes if you wanted to. It would change the consistency a little bit. It would kind of become more just a sweet sort of sweet mashed potatoes, like yams kind of thing that you have seasonally, but still it would be super delicious. So
absolutely.
And squash. Yep. Pinch poke. Squash. Yep. Squash is a great way to make things creamy without having to add like the cream. So it's a great way to do that. But if you are trying to do cream, what are some of, the options to make things creamier? Obviously there's milk, there's cream.
Absolutely. And then there's coconut milk.
It's a great
you can create some beautiful flavors with coconut milk.
It's true.
And spices.
And if you kind of get to the point, sometimes if you use enough coconut milk and you're doing it often enough, everything kind of starts to taste that sort of coconutty sort of flavor. And if you kind of get a little tired of that, like I do every once in a while, macadamia milk is just, if you can do nuts, is a great substitute. It's got a thicker, creamier consistency, but it's kind of a more neutral flavor than coconut milk is. So, and it is a little spendier, but when you're feeling spendy and fancy, so.
Well, and you're saving so much by making the soup. You can afford.
You really are.
I gotta try that.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
So some of the other starches that you can add to it, obviously rice, pasta, beans. There's a lot of recipes out there that you can add all of those things without pre-cooking them, and just the broth, charges it up, gives it its extra flavor. With things like pastas, you want to be a little bit careful, because if you're not going to eat all of it, then you might want to just cook portions of it, because the pasta will just, as it continues to sit in your refrigerator for leftovers, it will just continue to soak up the rest of the broth. So,
you know what I like using for pasta, because it doesn't do that as much and create the mush factor, is orzo. Do you ever use orzo?
Oh,
I don't know. It just seems like
I don't know why I forget about it. I often forget about it, but it's, you're right. It keeps that al dente. It's the hybrid of rice and pasta, really.
Yeah.
That comes together.
Kind of holds up a little bit better.
And it doesn't soak stuff up quite as much. That's good. Yeah. But oh man, soups.
I know.
Is it lunchtime? I feel like it's lunchtime.
I know.
Did we get there?
And it's time today too. It's time for a new soup today.
Yeah, it is. And winter time is best time.
Yeah. Oh yes. It's fun to look up. There's an endless amount of recipes to look up, and it's really fun to do. Because you learn a lot every new soup you make, every different kind. But then I found that you kind of it just becomes kind of a formula where you don't necessarily always have to have a recipe. And then again, like you said, you can use, whatever's in your cabinet, just that combination of starting off. I like to saute Do you like to saute your veggies in the Instant Pot first?
Yeah, depending on what the vegetables are, but for sure, I find that the onions, the carrots, and the celery, it does a better job of sautéing it, just because it takes so long to soften. So
Yeah,
unless I'm
yeah,
doing the crock pot feature and I'm letting it sit all day, yeah,
right.
I'll get them sautéed off first.
And that's one of the reasons why I like the Instant Pot better
Mhm.
than like a crock pot, because there's something about just a little bit of fat,
Mhm.
butter or olive oil or something, and then sauteing in that just I find brings a lot to the soup, and then putting like my herbs in when I'm sauteing them too, and then they get nice and
Right,
incorporated to everything.
right.
So yeah, just starting off with the mirepoix,
Mhm.
whatever other
Yeah.
veggies, whether I want those to saute or not. Throwing in my herbs and then my broth. And then if I'm adding carbs, whatever kind of, like you said,
Mhm.
starch that you want to add in it. And you don't need a recipe. You can make a great soup. And then just be sure, if you're using the Instapot, or even if you're cooking at stovetop, there are things you don't want to slow or long cook as part of the recipe.
Mhm.
Like kale, you always want to add at the end,
Right,
so that it doesn't turn to total mush.
right.
Spinach too. If you're thickening it at all, like maybe with a cornstarch slurry, you do that at the end.
Mhm.
You can turn back on the saute function or turn the heat up on the stove.
Yeah.
And then obviously, like we talked about, anything creamy you add after cooking. But
Yeah,
that's
right
basically
before. For sure. And here's a couple things that I've
everything else.
tried is that basically after the carrot, celery, onion base, and in some cases I filter that off. I go ahead and just use just the broth from that, take out the chunks. Again, it's the base for a ton of different a ton of different cultures. And so depending on the spices that you add, so this past, a couple weeks ago, I did one with like chickpeas and like tikka masala and some like turmeric, and then you have more of an Indian flavor to it, and that really was wonderful. I did that with like some cauliflower because I decided to do just totally meat free on that, and that was
Ooh.
really good. And then serve that over cooked rice, which then kind of became its own little soup sort of thing in its own way. And then same thing, same base that I use for making ramen, like homemade ramen. And then instead adding at the very end again, your noodles and your tender greens and like a soft boiled egg right on top, right afterwards. Oh, it's really good. So
That sounds good. That sounds good.
yeah, and it's a good way to, again, just a few simple ingredients kind of starts the base for everything. So,
Sure
and you
does.
probably already have them on hand. So, and they're cheap.
Make some soup.
Yeah, and they don't even have to be pretty. So, and in fact, it's better if they're not. So, all right. I think as they say, soup's on. I think I'm gonna go get my soup on right now.
No soup for you. No,
Oh, copyright. Oh
kidding.
my goodness.
That's
Now we're gonna have to
cool.
pay
Yeah.
a ton of money for that. All right. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.